Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights and let our minds drift back to a civilization that laid the very foundations of writing, law, and complex society, ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where cities like Ur and Babylon rose from the Fertile Crescent. You might imagine scribes in this powerful, mysterious land as wise, revered figures, calmly recording history and crafting epic tales. But for the aspiring scribe, the reality was often far from tranquil. Tonight, we're going to explore what sucked about being a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia. You might think a life of learning sounds pretty good, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, the path to literacy was a grueling ordeal, filled with endless rote memorization and harsh discipline, making it a true test of endurance. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as you settle in for tonight's journey, feel free to drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Whether that's a cozy evening in a quiet suburb of San Diego, California, or the early morning hours in a bustling Boston apartment. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine yourself, now, a young boy, perhaps named Nabu, living in the bustling city of Ur around 2000 BCE. You're maybe 7 or 8 years old, a time when most kids would be playing in the dusty streets or helping their parents in the fields or workshops. But your parents, perhaps minor officials or prosperous merchants, have decided you have a different destiny. You are to become a scribe, a master of the written word, a member of an elite class. Sounds prestigious? Right. Well, your first taste of this noble profession is anything but glamorous. You find yourself dragged, perhaps against your will, to the Aduba, the tablet house, which is essentially the scribe school. It's a cramped, noisy, and often suffocating place, filled with dozens of other boys all hunched over clay tablets, struggling with the same daunting task. Your day begins before dawn. No leisurely mornings here? You're up, perhaps gulping down a bit of watered-down beer and some flatbread before heading to the Aduba. Once there, you're not greeted with gentle encouragement. Instead, you face the Umiya, the school father, a stern, often unforgiving master whose primary tools seem to be a reed stylus for writing and a stick for corporal punishment. Your first lesson. Not philosophy or literature, but the endless mind-numbing task of copying. You're given a tablet with a single cuneiform sign, or perhaps a short list of signs, meticulously etched by the master. Your job is to reproduce it, perfectly, dozens, even hundreds of times, on your own lump of wet clay. Your fingers cramp, your eyes strain in the dim light of the schoolroom, and the clay smudges and sticks to everything. You try your best, but the signs twist and merge, your lines wobble, and the master's sharp gaze misses nothing. A misformed wedge, an incorrect angle, a smudged tablet, all can earn you a stinging blow from the stick, delivered by the man in charge of the whip. This is the brutal, unrelenting reality of the grueling apprenticeship, endless drudgery, where the path to literacy was paved with rote memorization, repetitive copying, and the constant threat of physical discipline. It's like trying to learn to code by copying lines of assembly language by hand for 10 hours a day. And if you get one character wrong, your teacher hits you with a ruler. And just when you think you've almost got it, you realize you're only on the first letter of the first word of the first sentence of the first book of the first library. Good luck, Nabu. The apprenticeship to become a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia was indeed long and grueling, typically lasting many years, often from early childhood into young adulthood. It was not a casual pursuit, it was a serious commitment, requiring immense discipline and endurance. Boys, and rarely girls, from privileged families as only they could afford the fees and forgo a child's labor, would enter these schools, hoping to secure a future in administration, law, much of religious service. The curriculum was intensely focused on rote memorization. Students began by learning the basic elements of cuneiform, the individual wedges. Then simple signs, then more complex logogram signs representing whole words and syllabic signs representing syllables. This wasn't like learning the ABCs. Cuneiform had thousands of distinct signs, and many could have multiple meanings depending on context, making the task exponentially harder. Imagine trying to memorize an entire dictionary, not just the words, but every possible nuance of every symbol, all by copying it out on a cumbersome medium. A common historical truth is that scribal schools in ancient Mesopotamia, known as adubas, subjected students to a rigorous and lengthy curriculum primarily based on rote memorization and extensive copying of cuneiform texts, aiming to instill a high degree of literacy and administrative competence. The training was a significant investment for families and typically lasted for many years. Historians still widely debate the exact percentage of the Mesopotamian population that was fully literate. Given the intensive and costly nature of scribal training, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the grueling apprenticeship endless drudgery in ancient Mesopotamia is the curious existence of model contracts, or practice legal documents, that scribal students would copy endlessly, not just for their cuneiform practice, but to internalize the complex legal formulas, clauses, and specific phrasing required for drawing up anything from marriage contracts to land sales, transforming their rote copying into an early form of legal education, imbuing them with the practical knowledge that would be vital to their later administrative careers, often long before they truly understood the nuances of the law. Imagine young Nabu diligently copying out a document that meticulously details the sale of a field, including the names of witnesses, the agreed price in silver, and the curses invoked upon anyone who might dispute the sale, all while barely understanding the socio-economic implications. He's just focused on getting the wedges right, but he's unknowingly absorbing the very bedrock of Mesopotamian jurisprudence. It's like learning to draft complex legal briefs by hand for years, before you've even been to law school, and every mistake earns you a whack with a stick. The discipline in the Aduba was notoriously harsh. The school father was assisted by various teachers or masters, often given titles like man in charge of the stick or man in charge of the whip. Corporal punishment was a regular occurrence for various transgressions. Poor handwriting, incorrect signs, tardiness, talking out of turn, or simply not paying attention. The goal was not just to correct mistakes, but to instill absolute obedience and meticulousness, traits deemed essential for accurate record keeping. Imagine the constant tension, the fear of making a mistake, the dull ache in your hands from repeated copying, and the sharp sting of the stick if you faltered. It truly sucked to be a child under such unrelenting pressure. Beyond copying individual signs, students progressed to copying lists of words, then grammatical paradigms, and eventually entire literary texts, legal codes, and administrative documents. These often included Sumerian Akkadian dictionaries, as Sumerian remained the language of scholarship and religion, even after Akkadian became the spoken language. This bilingualism added another layer of complexity to their already formidable task. They weren't just learning a language, they were learning two, often very different, languages and their associated writing systems simultaneously. The learning environment itself was far from ideal. Schoolrooms were often dimly lit, either by natural light filtered through small openings or by flickering oil lamps. The air would be thick with dust from the clay tablets, and the constant scratching of styluses on wet clay would create a cacophony of sound. Students would sit or squat on the floor, their backs aching, their eyes strained, spending hours in this uncomfortable posture. There were no ergonomic chairs or bright, well-ventilated classrooms. The sheer volume of material to be memorized was staggering. A fully trained scribe had to be proficient in thousands of cuneiform signs, understand their phonetic and semantic values, and be able to apply them correctly in various contexts, from writing administrative receipts to composing hymns or epic poems. This required an almost superhuman capacity for recall and sustained focus. The curriculum wasn't designed for casual learning. It was designed to forge an elite class of literary experts. Capable of maintaining the complex bureaucratic machinery of the state, this grueling apprenticeship shaped not just the intellectual capabilities of the future scribe, but also their character. They learned patience, precision, resilience, and a profound respect for the written word. They understood that their future success, indeed their very survival in the Adaba, depended on their ability to suppress personal desires and submit to the relentless demands of their training. The path to becoming a scribe was a literal crucible, designed to burn away all but the most dedicated and capable. So, while the idea of literacy in ancient Mesopotamia might seem like a pathway to enlightenment, the stark reality of the grueling apprenticeship, endless drudgery, where the road to becoming a scribe was paved with relentless rote memorization, repetitive copying, and constant harsh discipline, was anything but easy. This era reminds us of the profound effort and sacrifice required to achieve literacy in a world without printing presses or universal education, proving that for centuries, the privilege of writing came at a steep personal cost, leaving us truly grateful for modern educational methods, comfortable learning environments, and the freedom from daily corporal punishment, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's miserable childhood. Let's gently return from the grueling, disciplined world of the apprenticeship, where endless drudgery defined the early life of a Mesopotamian scribe. If we've just explored the harsh training, tonight we'll delve into the very heart of their craft cuneiform's complexity. 1,000 symbols. You might imagine a simple alphabet, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, cuneiform's complexity was an overwhelming challenge of mastering 1,000 symbols, each capable of multiple meanings, making true literacy an almost superhuman feat. Imagine yourself, now young Nabu, still in the Adaba in Ur, perhaps a few years into your training, around 1990 BCE. You've mastered the basic wedges, the straight lines and triangles pressed into the soft clay with your reed stylus. You can even copy simple lists of common nouns. You might feel a flicker of pride, a small sense of accomplishment. But then your Umiya, the school father, presents you with a new tablet, covered not just with simple signs, but with a dizzying array of complex combinations. He explains that this is cuneiform, the writing system of your world, and it's not just a collection of pictures. It's a sophisticated, maddeningly intricate web of logograms, ideograms, and syllabic signs. One symbol might represent an entire word, like sun or god. The very next symbol might represent a sound, like ba or an... And to make it even more frustrating, that same symbol for sun might also be used to represent the sound ud, or it might combine with other symbols to form an entirely different word. You stare at the tablet, your youthful confidence draining away. How can one symbol mean so many things? How can you possibly remember all the context? The sheer volume of individual signs easily over 1,000 common ones. With thousands more rare variations feels like an insurmountable mountain. Your head aches just thinking about it. This isn't just learning to read and write, it's like trying to learn a musical instrument that has 1,000 different keys. And each key plays a different note depending on what other keys you're pressing. And also, what day of the week it is. This is the overwhelming, mind-bending truth of cuneiform's complexity, where mastering 1,000 symbols was not just a challenge, but a relentless intellectual marathon that demanded perfect recall and meticulous attention to context, turning simple literacy into an arcane art. It really sucked to have to figure out if that squiggle meant ox or strength, or the sound gout, cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped, is widely recognized as one of the earliest systems of writing, originating in Sumer's southern Mesopotamia around 3,100 BCE. It evolved from simple pictographs drawings that represented objects into a sophisticated system where signs could represent objects, ideas, or sounds. This evolution made it incredibly flexible. capable of expressing complex thoughts and grammatical structures, but also profoundly difficult to master. At its peak, a fully proficient scribe needed to recognize and correctly use anywhere from 600 to 1,000 common cuneiform signs, with specialist texts potentially requiring knowledge of thousands more. Each of these signs was formed by pressing a reed stylus into wet clay, creating distinctive wedge-shaped marks. The signs themselves were often abstract, bearing little resemblance to the objects they originally depicted, making rote memorization even more crucial. A common historical truth is that cuneiform, one of the world's earliest writing systems, involved mastering hundreds to thousands of wedge-shaped signs, which could represent entire words, concepts, or phonetic syllables, making its acquisition a highly complex and specialized skill. Its intricate nature necessitated years of dedicated scribal training. Historians still widely debate the precise number of cuneiform signs actively used in daily administrative or literary practice at various points in Mesopotamian history. Given regional and temporal variations in script complexity, a fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about cuneiform's complexity and the challenge of mastering 1,000 symbols is the curious phenomenon of polyvalency, where a single cuneiform sign could have multiple readings as a logogram, a syllabic sign, or even a determinative, sometimes entirely unrelated. Forcing scribes to rely heavily on context and their own vast memorized knowledge to correctly interpret texts, making the act of reading as much an art of informed guesswork as precise decoding, and adding an entirely new layer of intellectual difficulty to their already arduous training. Imagine young Nabu staring at a familiar sign, perhaps the one for water. He knows it can mean water as a word, but his Umiya might then explain that in a different context, it could represent the sound I, or perhaps function as a determinative, indicating that the following word is a type of liquid. This wasn't about simply recognizing a symbol. It was about inferring its specific function from the surrounding text. A mental gymnastics routine performed constantly. It's like learning English, where the letter A sometimes means a letter, sometimes sounds like ah, and sometimes tells you the next word is a fruit, all without spaces or punctuation. It truly sucked to have to do that all day. The sheer volume of signs meant that scribes spent years just on basic literacy. Unlike an alphabetic system, where a relatively small number of letters combine to form all words, cuneiform required the direct memorization of each unique sign and its various meanings and sounds. This was a monumental cognitive load. Imagine trying to read a modern book where every single word and every syllable within that word was represented by a unique, abstract symbol you had to learn individually. Furthermore, cuneiform was used to write several different languages throughout Mesopotamian history, including Sumerian, Akkadian, which had various dialects like Babylonian and Assyrian, Eblate and Elamite. While the core signs remained similar, their pronunciation and usage could vary dramatically between languages. A scribe working in, say, the Old Babylonian period might have to be proficient in both Sumerian, the language of traditional religious and legal texts, and Akkadian, the spoken administrative language, further complicating their studies. This bilingual mastery added a significant burden to their learning. The lack of standardized spelling or punctuation also compounded the difficulty. Texts were often written continuously, without word breaks or paragraph divisions. This meant that discerning where one word ended and another began, or determining the correct interpretation of a polyvalent sign, depended entirely on the scribe's deep knowledge of grammar, vocabulary, and context. This made reading, let alone writing, a deeply intricate process that required extensive practice and familiarity with vast quantities of literature. The complexity of cuneiform was a deliberate barrier to entry. Reinforcing the elite status of scribes, only a select few had the intellect, the means, and the perseverance to master such a demanding system. This exclusivity ensured that power remained concentrated in the hands of those who could read and write. providing them with a monopoly over information, administration, and legal processes. For young Nabu, the sheer difficulty of the script was a constant reminder of the immense privilege and responsibility that awaited him if he succeeded. The mastery of cuneiform was not just about memorization, it also required exceptional precision. Each wedge had to be impressed at the correct angle, depth, and length to form the sign accurately. A slight variation could render a sign illegible or, worse, change its meaning entirely, leading to errors in records, contracts, or even royal decrees. This constant demand for perfect execution under the watchful eye of the Umayya, remember him from chapter 1 with his stick added another layer of stress to their daily grind. So, while the invention of writing in ancient Mesopotamia was a towering achievement, the stark reality of cuneiform's complexity, where mastering 1,000 symbols was an overwhelming challenge of precise execution and contextual interpretation, was a formidable barrier to entry for any aspiring scribe. This era reminds us of the profound intellectual effort required to create and maintain early literacy systems, proving that for centuries, the power of the written word came at the cost of immense personal dedication, leaving us truly grateful for our simplified alphabets, standardized spelling, and accessible education, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's mind-bending apprenticeship. Let's gently return from the mind-bending complexity of cuneiform, where mastering 1,000 symbols was an overwhelming intellectual feat for our young scribe. If we've just explored the daunting mental challenge, tonight we'll delve into the very physical medium of their craft clay tablet calamity. Heavy, fragile, messy? You might imagine a neat stack of papyrus scrolls, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, writing involved the daily struggle with clay tablet calamity, dealing with a medium that was simultaneously heavy, fragile, and messy, turning every written word into a tangible battle against the elements and the material itself. Imagine yourself now, young Nabu, still in the Aduba in Ur, perhaps a bit older, maybe 10 or 11, around 1980 BCE. You've got a grasp on some hundreds of cuneiform signs, a small victory after the cuneiform's complexity of chapter 2. But the physical act of writing is a constant source of frustration. Your master, the Umayya, still with that stick. Remember him from chapter 1, has just dictated a long list of goods received at the temple storehouse. You quickly grab a lump of fresh, moist clay from the bucket. It's surprisingly heavy, much heavier than a piece of paper, and you have to knead it just right to get a smooth, flat surface. As you begin to press your reed stylus into the clay, carefully forming each wedge-shaped sign, you realize how messy it is. Clay dust gets everywhere on your hands, your clothes, even in your hair. And then, just as you're nearing the end of a long line of carefully inscribed signs, your hand slips, or the lump of clay, soft and yielding, tears slightly, or worse, another student bumps your elbow, and your perfectly formed tablet, still wet and vulnerable, suddenly falls to the dirt floor, shattering into dozens of unreadable fragments. A wave of despair washes over you. All that meticulous work, all that concentration, ruined in an instant. You have to start all over again, from scratch, with a fresh lump of clay, under the disapproving gaze of your master. This is the constant, infuriating truth of clay tablet calamity, where your writing medium was simultaneously heavy, fragile, and messy, turning every act of inscription into a precarious negotiation with an uncooperative material, making even basic record-keeping a strenuous physical and mental test. It's like trying to write a novel on a blackboard that keeps erasing itself, or a computer that crashes every 5 minutes. But the save button is a kiln, and if you drop your laptop, it turns into dust. It really sucked to literally break your work with one wrong move. The choice of clay as the primary writing medium in Mesopotamia was a practical one, driven by its abundant availability in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Unlike papyrus, which required specific plants and processing, or parchment, which needed animal skins. Clay was cheap, ubiquitous, and easily prepared. However, its practical advantages came with significant drawbacks for the scribes who had to work with it daily. Firstly, clay tablets were inherently heavy. A small administrative receipt might be manageable, but larger literary or legal texts could comprise dozens, even hundreds, of tablets, each weighing a considerable amount. Imagine storing, retrieving, and transporting an archive of thousands of these heavy, brick-like documents. A scribe working on a complex legal case or a multi-chapter epic would be surrounded by piles of cumbersome tablets, constantly having to lift, move, and arrange them. This was a physical strain that modern writers, with their lightweight laptops or paper notebooks, can barely conceive. Secondly, and perhaps most frustratingly for a scribe, clay tablets were incredibly fragile when wet. The writing process involved inscribing signs into soft, pliable clay. While this allowed for easy correction by simply smoothing over a mistake, it also meant that a tablet could be easily smudged, warped, or completely ruined by an accidental bump, a slip of the hand, or even a sudden gust of wind carrying dust. Imagine spending hours meticulously crafting a complex legal contract, ensuring every cuneiform sign was perfectly formed, only for the entire piece to crumble or smudge because you sneezed. The precision demanded was immense, and the risk of ruination was ever present until the tablet was dried or baked. A common historical truth is that ancient Mesopotamian scribes primarily wrote on clay tablets using reed styluses, a method necessitated by the abundance of clay but burdened by the material's weight, fragility especially when wet, and inherent messiness. These physical challenges added significant difficulty to the scribal profession. Historians still widely debate the precise methods used for large-scale tablet storage and retrieval within ancient Mesopotamian archives, given the material's bulk and susceptibility to damage. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about clay tablet calamity and the daily struggle with a medium that was heavy, fragile, and messy is the curious but essential tablet-shape specialization, where scribes would often custom form specific shapes of clay tablets, G, round for school exercises, pillow-shaped for letters, square for administrative records, multi-sided prisms for historical annals, not just for aesthetic or archival purposes, but as a subtle mnemonic aid and a practical way to manage the physical properties of the clay for different types of texts, influencing how a scribe approached each writing task from the very first moment they pressed the wet lump. Imagine young Naibu instinctively reaching for a small, round lump of clay for his daily copying exercises because they were easy to hold and discard, but then carefully rolling out a precise rectangular slab for a formal legal document, knowing its shape would affect how it dried and how easily it could be stored. This wasn't just about making it pretty, it was about optimizing the physical properties of the clay for its ultimate purpose. A tiny battle won against the inherent challenges of the medium. It's like having to sculpt a specific type of paper for every different kind of email you write. It really sucked to have to factor in the shape for every single document you created. Thirdly, working with clay was inherently messy. As the stylus pressed into the wet clay, tiny particles would inevitably stick to the scribe's hands, clothes, and work surface. The dusty environment of Mesopotamia, a constant companion. As we'll explore more in Chapter 4, meant that even dried clay could create dust. Imagine working day in and day out with this material. Your hands constantly coated in a fine layer of clay. Your clothes perpetually smudged. While not as overtly dangerous as some other historical sucked factors, the constant mess contributed to a general sense of discomfort and the tedious nature of the job. The drying process was also a crucial, yet vulnerable stage. Once inscribed, tablets had to be carefully dried. Smaller administrative tablets might be sun-dried, making them hard and durable enough for daily handling. However, important legal, literary, or historical texts, intended for long-term preservation, were often baked in kilns, transforming them into virtually indestructible ceramic. This baking process added an extra layer of complexity and time to the scribal workflow, and any error during baking could ruin a meticulously inscribed tablet. Imagine waiting anxiously for your perfectly written tablet to emerge from the kiln, praying it hasn't cracked or warped during the firing. Furthermore, the physical limitations of clay influence the very nature of cuneiform writing. The wedge-shaped marks were an efficient way to write on clay, as they could be easily impressed with a simple stylus. However, this method inherently made fine detail difficult, contributing to the abstract nature of many signs. The size of the tablet also limited the amount of text that could be inscribed on a single piece, necessitating multi-tablet works for longer texts, which then had to be meticulously numbered and indexed to ensure their order was preserved. The preparation of the clay itself was also a task. It had to be cleaned, kneaded, and shaped to the desired consistency and size. This wasn't work for the scribe himself, but for assistants or laborers, highlighting the multi-stage process involved in creating a single written document. It was a laborious beginning to an already demanding craft. So, while the enduring clay tablets are a treasure trove for modern historians, the stark reality of clay tablet calamity, where a scribe's daily work involved wrestling with a medium that was simultaneously heavy, fragile, and messy, was a relentless physical and mental challenge. This era reminds us of the profound link between writing technology and the practical difficulties faced by those who wielded it, proving that for centuries, the creation of knowledge was an arduous, tangible labor, leaving us truly grateful for our lightweight, easily erasable, and endlessly reproducible digital and paper media, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's messy, back-breaking work. Let's gently return from the physical frustrations of clay tablet calamity, where the heavy, fragile, and messy nature of the writing medium presented daily struggles for our Mesopotamian scribe. If we've just explored the challenges of the material, tonight we'll delve into the environmental realities that further compounded their misery, heat, and dust. Harsh working conditions. You might imagine a climate-controlled office, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, the daily grind of writing took place under oppressive heat and dust, creating harsh working conditions that were physically draining and perpetually uncomfortable. Imagine yourself now. Nabu, no longer a young boy, but a seasoned apprentice, perhaps in his late teens, around 1970 BCE, still striving for mastery in the Aduba and Ur. The city of Ur, a sprawling metropolis, bustles around you, but within the walls of the tablet house, the atmosphere is anything but invigorating. It's the height of summer. The sun beats down mercilessly on the mud brick walls, turning the interior into a suffocating oven. The air is thick, not just with the humidity rising from the nearby Euphrates, but with the pervasive, fine dust that seems to cling to everything. It coats your reed stylus, settles on your clay tablets, and constantly irritates your eyes and throat. You're sweating profusely, your linen tunic clinging uncomfortably to your skin. The clay, which needs to stay moist for writing, dries out far too quickly in the oppressive heat, forcing you to constantly re-wet it. Or worse, making it crumbly and unworkable. The dim light, already a challenge for precise cuneiform. A recurring issue with cuneiform's complexity from Chapter 2 seems even weaker in the hazy, dust-filled air. You wipe sweat from your brow, only to smudge your work, or get a gritty feeling in your eyes. There are no fans, no air conditioning, no relief from the relentless sun or the suffocating dust. This is the constant, draining truth of heat and dust, where harsh working conditions were not just an occasional nuisance, but a daily, pervasive reality that compounded the physical and mental demands of a scribe's meticulous craft. It's like trying to do delicate calligraphy in a poorly lit, unventilated attic during a heat wave. While someone is constantly shaking out a dusty rug next to you, it really sucked to be hot, dirty, and expected to produce perfect work. Ancient Mesopotamia, located in what is largely modern-day Iraq, is characterized by an extreme climate. Summers are intensely hot and dry, with temperatures regularly soaring above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, 38 degrees Celsius, and often reaching much higher. Winters, while cooler, could still be dusty and unpredictable. The climate was a defining feature of life for everyone, including scribes, and it directly impacted their working conditions. The primary building material in Mesopotamia was mud brick, due to the scarcity of stone and timber. While mud brick structures offered some insulation, they could still become stiflingly hot during the peak summer months. Scribes often worked in courtyards or open rooms to catch any faint breeze, but this also exposed them to the elements. Imagine sitting for hours in a small, enclosed room, the heat radiating from the walls, the air still and heavy. This was a common reality for students in the Aduba. Remember that grueling apprenticeship from Chapter 1 and for professional scribes alike. A common historical truth is that scribes in ancient Mesopotamia worked under physically demanding environmental conditions, enduring oppressive heat and pervasive dust, which significantly impacted the comfort and efficiency of their daily tasks, particularly their intricate work with clay tablets. These environmental factors were inherent challenges of the Mesopotamian climate. Historians still widely debate the specific architectural features or daily routines scribes might have employed to mitigate the extreme heat and dust within their workspaces. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about heat and dust and the pervasive reality of harsh working conditions for Mesopotamian scribes is the curious reliance on re-wetting stations or clay cisterns strategically placed within scribal schools and offices, where large quantities of fresh, moist clay were kept submerged in cool water to prevent premature drying and maintain pliability for writing, essentially transforming parts of their workspaces into mini makeshift clay humidors that, while practical, also contributed to a perpetually damp, earthy smell and likely attracted more insects, adding another subtle layer of discomfort to their environment. Imagine Nabu constantly having to get up from his work to fetch a fresh, cool lump of clay from a large and communal water basin, the pungent smell of wet earth filling his nostrils as he tries to write. This wasn't just about getting the material, it was about battling the elements directly at the source, ensuring the clay remained workable in the face of the relentless sun. It's like having to constantly spritz your paper with water to keep your ink from drying. But the water comes from a giant mud puddle in your office. It truly sucked to have to manage your writing material against the environment itself. Dust was an omnipresent nuisance. Mesopotamia was an arid region, and the constant movement of people, animals, and carts, combined with wind, kicked up fine particles of sand and soil. Scribes, working with wet clay, would find this dust adhering to their hands, their styluses, and, most frustratingly, to the very surfaces of their fresh tablets. Imagine the delicate work of inscribing tiny cuneiform wedges, only for a sudden gust of wind to blow dust across your moist tablet, embedding gritty particles into your precise lines and potentially ruining your work. The dust also irritated eyes and lungs, leading to chronic discomfort and potentially long-term health issues. There were no HEPA filters or air purifiers in ancient Mesopotamia, just the pervasive grit of the environment. The combination of heat and dust also significantly impacted the clay tablets themselves. As we discussed in Chapter 3, clay needed to be kept moist for inscription. In hot, dry conditions, fresh clay would dry out rapidly, becoming too brittle to write on or too hard to modify. Scribes would have to work quickly, or constantly re-wet their tablets, adding an extra layer of urgency and interruption to their already meticulous work. Imagine the frustration of having your writing surface literally harden beneath your stylus before you'd even finished a line. Beyond the immediate physical discomfort, the harsh working conditions affected scribes' overall well-being and productivity. Dehydration was a constant threat in the heat, and poor ventilation combined with dust could lead to respiratory problems. The glare of the sun in outdoor or semi-outdoor workspaces, coupled with the intricate nature of cuneiform, remember, all those tiny wedges, would contribute to eye strain and headaches, especially given the lack of artificial lighting options beyond flickering oil lamps. The lack of modern amenities meant that scribal life was physically demanding even before the intellectual challenges. There were no ergonomic workspaces, climate control, or even clean, dust-free environments. Scribes were expected to endure these conditions, focusing on their demanding tasks despite the heat, the dust, and the general physical discomfort. This resilience was part of their training and part of the expectation of their profession. So, while the image of ancient Mesopotamian civilization might evoke impressive architectural feats, the stark reality of heat and dust, where harsh working conditions were a daily, pervasive burden for scribes, added significant physical strain to their already demanding craft. This era reminds us of the profound impact of environmental factors on daily labor in the ancient world, proving that for centuries, even the most esteemed intellectual professions came with a heavy physical toll, leaving us truly grateful for modern climate control, air filtration, and comfortable workspaces, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's perpetually hot, dusty, and uncomfortable existence. Let's gently return from the oppressive environment of heat and dust, where harsh working conditions constantly challenged our Mesopotamian scribe. If we've just explored the external pressures, tonight we'll delve into the soul-crushing internal reality of their daily grind, monotonous labor, repetitive, tedious tasks. You might imagine intellectual stimulation, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, the life of a scribe was dominated by monotonous labor, a relentless cycle of repetitive, tedious tasks that, despite their importance, that he could drain the spirit and test the limits of human endurance. Imagine yourself now, Nabu, no longer just an apprentice, but a fully fledged scribe working for the temple administration in Uri, perhaps around 1960 BCE. You've endured the grueling training, a distant, painful memory from Chapter 1, mastered the thousands of complex cuneiform symbols, a hard-won victory from Chapter 2, and even learned to skillfully manage the challenges of working with heavy, fragile, and messy clay. Your daily struggle from Chapter 3. You've navigated the oppressive heat and dust of the Mesopotamian climate, the constant, irritating backdrop from Chapter 4. You thought, perhaps, that being a professional scribe would bring varied and intellectually stimulating work. But the reality is far more mundane, far more soul-crushing. Your day begins, as it always does, with an endless queue of petitioners, merchants, and temple officials, each needing a receipt, a contract, a record of goods exchanged. You receive a lump of wet clay, meticulously prepare it, and then, with painstaking precision, you transcribe the details. 3 gur of barley received from Sin Idinam for the temple granary. Then the next, 2 sheep delivered to the shepherd Urdnungal from the temple flock. Then another, and another, and another. All day, every day. The same types of transactions, the same formulaic phrases, the same endless repetition of names, numbers, and goods. Even when you're not recording transactions, you might be tasked with copying ancient literary texts for the temple library. Day after day, you sit and meticulously reproduce the same epic poems, the same hymns, the same proverbs, sometimes for weeks on end, without a single new word to truly engage your mind. Your fingers cramp from the endless pressing of the stylus. Your eyes blur from staring at the intricate wedges, and your mind drifts from the sheer monotony. There's little room for original thought, little opportunity for creativity. This is the pervasive, draining truth of monotonous labor, where a scribe's life was dominated by repetitive, tedious tasks that, while vital to the functioning of society, offered little in the way of intellectual novelty or personal fulfillment, turning every day into a test of mental endurance. It's like being a data entry clerk who also has to manually rewrite entire books, all day, every day for years, with no internet or coffee breaks. It really sucked to be bored to tears by your own brilliance. The vast majority of scribal work in ancient Mesopotamia was administrative and bureaucratic. This means scribes spent their days engaged in highly repetitive, tedious tasks essential for the functioning of temples, palaces, and private businesses. They were the backbone of the economy and administration, meticulously recording every transaction, every census, every legal judgment. Their daily duties included recording transactions. This was perhaps the most common task. Scribes would document the receipt and disbursement of goods grain, livestock, textiles, metals, loans, debts, payments, and taxes. Each record involves specific formulas, names, dates, and quantities. Imagine writing hundreds of similar receipts every week, copying legal documents, creating copies of contracts, deeds, wills, and court proceedings was another frequent task. While important, the scribe's role was to reproduce existing forms and content, not to draft original legal arguments, maintaining inventories and ledgers. Scribes were responsible for keeping detailed accounts of resources, property, and personnel. This involved endless lists and numerical entries, requiring extreme accuracy but little intellectual variation. Drafting letters. While some letters might contain unique content, many were formulaic, particularly official correspondence, requiring scribes to fill in standard greetings, requests, and closings. A common historical truth is that the daily work of most scribes in ancient Mesopotamia was dominated by highly repetitive and administrative tasks, such as recording economic transactions, copying legal documents, and maintaining inventories, which, despite their critical importance to societal function, offered limited intellectual variety or creative opportunities. This routine administrative work constituted the bulk of the scribal profession. Historians still widely debate the psychological impact of such repetitive labor on the scribes themselves. Given the lack of personal memoirs from this professional class, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about monotonous labor and the relentless cycle of repetitive, tedious tasks for Mesopotamian scribes is the curious phenomenon of scribal errors as signatures where, despite the intense pressure for accuracy, a constant fear. As we'll see in Chapter 7, recurring idiosyncratic mistakes in copying or specific stylistic quirks could, over time, become recognizable signatures of individual scribes within the larger body of texts, sometimes even allowing modern scholars to attribute anonymous works to a specific hand, subtly transforming moments of tedium into unintentional, personal artistic marks, though certainly not appreciated by their superiors at the time. Imagine Nabu, in his endless copying, consistently forming a particular wedge slightly differently, or habitually omitting a specific minor determinative, while these might have earned him a reprimand. Centuries later, they might be the very clues that allow an archaeologist to trace his unique handwriting through a collection of tablets. It's like having your personal quirks become a secret watermark on every spreadsheet you ever filled out. It truly sucked to be forced into such dull work, only for your mistakes to define your unique legacy. Beyond administrative work, another significant part of a scribe's job was the copying of literary, religious, and scholarly texts. This was essential for the preservation and dissemination of knowledge in a world without printing. However, it was still largely a monotonous task. Imagine spending weeks or months copying out the Epic of Gilgamesh, line by line, tablet by tablet. While the content itself might be grand, the act of reproduction was purely mechanical. The scribe was a human copying machine, not an author. There was no room for interpretation, no opportunity to inject personal style, and certainly no chance to change the story or the theological pronouncements. The sheer volume of writing required also contributed to the tedium. A scribe was expected to produce numerous tablets daily, each requiring meticulous attention to detail and flawless cuneiform. Remember the intricate work from Chapter 2. The constant demand for output, combined with the unvarying nature of the tasks, created an environment ripe for mental fatigue and boredom. Your mind might drift, but your hand had to keep moving, perfectly pressing those wedges into the unforgiving clay, a physical struggle we explored in Chapter 3. This monotonous labor had a profound psychological effect. While scribes held a respected position in society, something we'll delve into more in Chapter 6, their daily reality was often far from glamorous. The lack of intellectual challenge in routine tasks, the endless repetition, and the constant pressure for accuracy could lead to mental exhaustion and a sense of unfulfillment. It's the kind of work that dulls the senses and drains the spirit, leaving little energy for truly creative pursuits outside of work, even if one had the inclination. Furthermore, the physical demands of this repetitive work, cramped hands, strained eyes, aching backs, issues we'll discuss in Chapter 9 exacerbated the mental fatigue. The scribe was a cog in the vast bureaucratic machine, essential for its operation, but personally interchangeable in many ways. His individual contribution was measured by his speed and accuracy in performing these tedious tasks, not by his originality or insight. So, while the image of ancient Mesopotamian scribes might evoke grand intellectual pursuits, the stark reality of monotonous labor, where a scribe's daily life was dominated by repetitive, tedious tasks essential for the state, was a draining, soul-crushing experience. This era reminds us of the profound human cost of bureaucratic efficiency in a pre-technological age, proving that for centuries, even the most esteemed intellectual professions came with a heavy psychological toll, leaving us truly grateful for diverse job responsibilities, opportunities for creativity, and the freedom from endless, unvarying manual transcription, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's endlessly dull daily grind. Let's gently return from the soul-crushing reality of monotonous labor, where repetitive, tedious tasks defined the daily life of our Mesopotamian scribe. If we've just explored the internal drain of their work, tonight we'll delve into their paradoxical social standing scribe status. Respected but restricted. You might imagine complete freedom that comes with intellectual power, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, a scribe status, while undoubtedly respected, was often profoundly restricted, confining them within rigid social structures that limited their personal autonomy and influence. Imagine yourself now, Nabu, having completed your arduous apprenticeship, a dim memory from Chapter 1, and survived the endless grind of administrative tasks, your daily reality from Chapter 5. You are a mature scribe, perhaps in your late 20s or early 30s, around 1950 BCE, working for a powerful merchant house in the thriving city of Babylon. You wear fine linen, perhaps a signet ring, and you walk with an air of quiet confidence. People defer to you. A common farmer seeking to register a land sale, a fisherman needing a loan contract, even a minor noble requiring a formal letter to the king. They all seek your services. You are essential. Your ability to read and write cuneiform, that maddeningly complex system from Chapter 2, is a rare and vital skill, placing you among the intellectual elite, a true master of knowledge in a largely illiterate society. You are respected for your learning, your precision, your administrative prowess. However, that despite this undeniable prestige, you are acutely aware of the invisible chains that bind you. You are, at the end of the day, a servant, whether to the temple, the palace, or a private business. Your daily schedule is dictated by others. Your work, while important, is often not your own. You transcribe, you record, you administer, but you rarely originate. You cannot simply decide to leave your post and pursue your own interests without severe repercussions. Your loyalty is expected, your obedience unquestioned. You might dine with influential people, but you are not truly one of them. You are an indispensable tool, but a tool nonetheless, operating within the strictures of a deeply hierarchical society where your intellectual power is restricted by your social function. This is the paradoxical, often frustrating truth of the scribe's status, where being respected for your unique skills did not translate into personal freedom or unchallenged authority, but rather into a life often profoundly restricted by your function within a rigid social order, a gilded cage of administrative service. It's like being the smartest person in the room, but you're also the highest paid intern, and you can't even leave for lunch without permission. It really sucked to be a genius on a leash, The status of scribes in ancient Mesopotamia was indeed elevated. In a society where only a tiny fraction of the population was literate, likely less than 1%, scribes held a virtual monopoly on knowledge and administration. Their skills were essential for the functioning of every aspect of Mesopotamian life. Government and law scribes drafted laws, recorded court proceedings, and managed royal decrees. The very concept of a legal system relied on their ability to write and preserve documents, economy and commerce. They handled all aspects of trade, from writing contracts and receipts to maintaining complex ledgers for large trading houses and temples. Without scribes, the intricate Mesopotamian economy would collapse. Religion scribes copied hymns, rituals, omens, and myths, preserving religious traditions and ensuring the correct performance of ceremonies. They were the guardians of sacred knowledge. Scholarship. They preserved scientific knowledge, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, historical annals, and literary works like the Epic of Gilgamesh. This made them indispensable, highly valued members of society. They often came from wealthy or aristocratic families, as scribal education was expensive and lengthy, a constant theme from Chapter 1, and their profession could lead to comfortable lives, exemption from military service, and access to powerful individuals. They were, in essence, the intellectual elite of their time. A common historical truth is that scribes in ancient Mesopotamia held a highly respected and indispensable position in society due to their rare literacy, which was crucial for the functioning of government, economy, religion, and scholarship. Their intellectual prowess placed them among the societal elite. Historians still widely debate the degree to which this high status translated into significant upward social mobility for individual scribes from less privileged backgrounds, beyond their immediate professional standing. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the scribe's status and its paradoxical nature of being respected but restricted is the curious phenomenon of scribal oaths, where, in some specific contexts, particularly for high-ranking administrative or legal scribes, they might be required to swear elaborate oaths of secrecy and loyalty, often invoking powerful deities and ancient curses, binding them not just to their immediate duties, but to the protection of state secrets or sensitive information, turning their intellectual prowess into a heavily guarded instrument of power rather than a source of personal autonomy, literally making their knowledge a controlled asset of the regime. Imagine Nabu as he rises in the ranks, being led to a dark temple chamber, where, before an idol, he takes a solemn oath, promising never to reveal the contents of sensitive royal correspondence or the details of certain legal judgments under penalty of divine wrath. This wasn't just professional ethics, it was a deeply spiritual, legally binding constraint on his intellectual freedom. It's like being forced to sign an eternal non-disclosure agreement with the gods, and the penalty for breach is eternal damnation. It really sucked to be both indispensable and totally bound. Despite this high respect, scribes faced significant restrictions. Their role was primarily functional. They were educated to serve the state, the temple, or powerful individuals. This meant their work was largely dictated by the needs of their patrons, not by their personal inclinations. Lack of autonomy. Most scribes did not choose their daily tasks. They were assigned documents to copy, records to keep, and letters to draft. There was little room for personal initiative or the pursuit of independent intellectual interests outside of their mandated duties, a frustrating continuity from the monotonous labor of Chapter 5. Social hierarchy. While educated, scribes were still part of a rigid social hierarchy. They were above common laborers and farmers, but below kings, high priests, and the most powerful nobles. Their power was derived from their functional indispensability, not from inherent aristocratic birthright. They were valuable servants, not rulers. Limited creative expression. As we've touched on and will delve deeper into in Chapter 8, the vast majority of scribal work involved copying and administration. Original composition, especially in literature or philosophy, was rare and usually reserved for the highest-ranking scribes or the most exceptional talents. And even then, often undertaken under patronage. Bound to patrons. A scribe was typically employed by a specific institution palace, temple, or a wealthy family. This meant their loyalty and services were tied to their employer. Moving between patrons might be possible, but often required careful negotiation and could be risky. Their livelihood and safety depended on remaining in good standing with their superiors. Strict codes of conduct scribes, especially those handling legal or economic records, operated under strict codes of conduct and ethics. Accuracy was paramount, a terrifying concept we'll explore further in Chapter 7, and any deviation could lead to severe penalties. This level of accountability, while necessary, imposed constant pressure. The contradiction was profound. Scribes held the keys to knowledge and administration, giving them indirect power, but they were simultaneously bound by the very systems they maintained. They were crucial cogs in the machine, but rarely the engineers of its design. Their intellectual brilliance was often channeled into meticulous, unceasing service, rather than groundbreaking innovation or personal expression. So, while the image of a Mesopotamian scribe might evoke a figure of wisdom and authority, the stark reality of the scribe's status, where being respected for their unique skills was profoundly restricted by their function within a rigid social order, was a pervasive truth. This era reminds us of the complex interplay between intellectual power and social hierarchy, proving that for centuries, even the most privileged professions came with significant limitations, leaving us truly grateful for modern notions of professional autonomy, creative freedom, and the ability to choose our own paths. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's gilded servitude, let's gently return from the paradoxical reality of the scribe's status, where being respected but restricted defined their place in Mesopotamian society. If we've just explored their social standing, tonight we'll delve into the most terrifying aspect of their daily work: fear of errors, punishment, and disgrace. You might imagine a forgiving boss, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, the fear of errors was a constant companion, as even minor mistakes could lead to severe punishment and disgrace. Turning every written word into a high-stakes gamble, imagine yourself now, Nabu, a seasoned scribe, perhaps working in the bustling legal quarter of Babylon, around 1940 BCE. You've earned your reputation for accuracy and meticulousness, qualities that have kept you employed and respected, a hard-won achievement from your scribe status in Chapter 6. Today, you are tasked with copying a crucial legal judgment, a complex dispute over water rights for several agricultural fields. This is not a simple receipt or a practice tablet. The humble beginnings from Chapter 1. This document will determine the livelihoods of entire families, perhaps even shape local political power. You dip your reed stylus into the water to moisten the tip. Carefully prepare a fresh, rectangular clay tablet. Remember the physical challenges of clay tablet calamity from Chapter 3, and begin to press the intricate cuneiform signs, those thousands of symbols from Chapter 2, into the soft clay. Every single wedge, every line, every numeral must be perfect. You are acutely aware that a single misplaced mark, a forgotten symbol, an incorrectly copied number, could entirely change the meaning of the judgment. If you write 2 instead of 3, or north instead of south, or omit a crucial clause, the consequences could be disastrous. The farmer who loses his land due to your error will not simply shrug it off. Disputes over land and resources could escalate into violence, even civil unrest. And you, the scribe, will be held directly accountable. You might face a severe beating, a familiar echo of the discipline from Chapter 1, a heavy fine that could impoverish your family, or even the ultimate professional humiliation, being publicly shamed, perhaps having your stylus broken, signifying your incompetence and the end of your career. The pressure is immense, a cold dread twisting in your stomach with every carefully inscribed mark. This isn't just about getting a good grade, it's about avoiding professional ruin and protecting yourself from potentially violent retribution. This is the constant, suffocating truth of the fear of errors, where the threat of severe punishment and disgrace hung over every written word, turning your meticulous craft into a terrifying tightrope walk without a net. It's like being a surgeon, where a single misplaced stitch means public flogging, and your patient's family gets to join in. It really sucked to have your livelihood, and potentially your safety, hinge on absolute perfection. The demand for accuracy in Mesopotamian scribal work was paramount. In a society that relied entirely on written records for administration, law, and commerce, even minor errors could have significant, far-reaching consequences. Unlike modern digital records, which can be easily corrected and disseminated, a clay tablet was a permanent physical document. Once dried or baked, an error was etched in stone or clay, in this case, potentially affecting generations. Scribes were the human computers of their era. Their precision was critical in legal documents, contracts, court judgments, deeds of sale, and wills needed to be absolutely precise. An incorrect name, date, quantity, or clause could invalidate the document, lead to disputes, or result in an injustice. Economic records ledgers, inventories, receipts, and tax records required meticulous accuracy to ensure fair trade, proper accounting of resources, and the efficient functioning of the economy. A misplaced zero could mean the difference between prosperity and famine for a family or an entire city. Official correspondence letters between kings, governors, and military commanders had to convey exact instructions and information. Ambiguity or error could lead to diplomatic incidents or military defeat. Religious texts, copying hymns, rituals, and omens demanded perfect fidelity to the original, as any deviation could be seen as an affront to the gods or a corruption of sacred knowledge. A common historical truth is that absolute accuracy was rigorously demanded of scribes in ancient Mesopotamia, particularly in legal and administrative texts, as even small errors could have significant economic, legal, or social ramifications for individuals and the state. This intense pressure was a defining characteristic of the scribal profession. Historians still widely debate the frequency of scribal errors in surviving texts and the systemic methods used to audit and verify the accuracy of official records, beyond simply punishing the individual scribe. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about the fear of errors and the severe threat of punishment and disgrace for Mesopotamian scribes is the curious inclusion of scribal curses, often appended to the colophon's endings of important literary or scholarly tablets, which invoked dire supernatural penalties such as divine wrath, loss of lineage, or eternal thirst upon anyone who might deliberately alter, damage, or fail to correctly copy the text, transforming a professional expectation of accuracy into a chilling, religiously sanctioned injunction, subtly placing the scribe under a divine watch for their meticulousness. Imagine Nabu as he completes a long copy of an ancient epic, meticulously inscribing the final lines that pronounce a curse upon any future scribe who dares to introduce an error into his perfect copy. He's not just writing, he's participating in a centuries-old tradition of supernatural quality control, and the weight of that tradition rests heavily on his own stylus. It's like having a celestial HR department that can literally curse your descendants if you mess up a spreadsheet. It really sucked to have your job performance tied to divine retribution. The consequences of scribal errors could range from inconvenient to catastrophic, and the punishments were designed to instill a profound sense of responsibility. Physical punishment. As we know from the Aduba Chapter 1, physical beatings were a common disciplinary tool during training. This could extend into professional life, especially for lesser offenses or repeated carelessness. Imagine the sting of the rod on your back for a poorly transcribed contract. A stark reminder of the cost of imprecision, fines, and restitution. If an error led to financial loss for a party, the scribe might be forced to pay a hefty fine or make restitution, potentially bankrupting them. For example, if a scribe accidentally miscalculated a loan interest, he might have to personally cover the deficit. Public humiliation for severe errors or gross negligence. A scribe might face public disgrace. This could involve being stripped of their tools, their stylus, their clayboard, publicly shamed, or even expelled from their guild, effectively ending their career and their social standing, a terrifying prospect for a profession that offered such status. As we saw in Chapter 6, imagine standing in the city square, your precious stylus broken before your eyes, your name whispered with disdain by those who once sought your services, loss of employment and reputation. Even without formal punishment, a scribe known for carelessness would quickly lose clients and employment opportunities. Their reputation for accuracy was their most valuable asset, and a single significant error could shatter it, leading to professional ruin and economic hardship for their family. Indirect consequences. In cases where a scribal error led to a major injustice or political instability, the consequences could even be more severe, potentially involving imprisonment or worse. Though direct evidence of such extreme punishment solely for scribal errors is rarer, this constant threat fostered an environment of intense pressure and anxiety. Every tablet, every word, every wedge was a potential pitfall. Scribes developed meticulous habits rereading their work, having others check it, and even including colophons and notes that explicitly stated checked and verified to attest to their diligence. The goal was not just to produce correct work, but to visibly demonstrate that every possible precaution against error had been taken. So, while the enduring records of ancient Mesopotamia are a testament to scribal skill, the stark reality of the fear of errors, where even minor mistakes could lead to severe punishment and disgrace, created an environment of relentless pressure for the scribe. This era reminds us of the profound responsibility and terrifying consequences attached to the written word in a pre-digital age, proving that, for centuries, the power of literacy came at a heavy personal cost, leaving us truly grateful for our digital undo buttons, spell checkers, and professional liability insurance. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's terrifying daily tightrope walk, let's gently return from the terrifying reality of the fear of errors, where punishment and disgrace hung over every word our Mesopotamian scribe wrote. If we've just explored the immense pressure for accuracy, tonight we'll delve into a more subtle, yet equally frustrating aspect of their professional lives' limited creativity: copyists, not authors. You might imagine a world of literary innovation, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, the life of a scribe was one of limited creativity, predominantly spent as copyists, not authors, where personal expression was largely sacrificed for faithful reproduction. Imagine yourself now, Nabu, perhaps nearing the end of your long and distinguished career as a scribe in the royal court of Babylon. Around 1920 BCE, you've seen it all: countless administrative records, complex legal contracts where fear of errors was a daily terror from Chapter 7, and countless letters. You have mastered the intricate art of cuneiform, that thousand-symbol maze from Chapter 2, deftly handled the unwieldy clay tablets, the constant struggle with clay tablet calamity from Chapter 3, and endured the oppressive heat and dust of Mesopotamia, the relentless physical backdrop from Chapter 4. You are renowned for your precise hand and your vast knowledge of ancient texts. Yet, as you sit in the quiet of the scriptorium, preparing to copy yet another version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, or a collection of ancient proverbs, a quiet sense of longing settles over you. You have spent decades absorbing the wisdom of your ancestors, the epic tales, the hymns to the gods, the meticulous scientific observations. You understand the language, the rhythm, the very soul of these narratives. But your role, overwhelmingly, has been to reproduce, to preserve, to transmit. Rarely, if ever, have you been asked to create something entirely new, to express your own unique thoughts, to craft an original story or a personal reflection. The grand narratives, the profound philosophical insights, the innovative legal principles. These were largely the products of previous generations, or perhaps of a few exceptional, long-dead master scribes. You are a highly skilled craftsman, a perfect conduit, but not truly a source. Your hand records, But your mind, in terms of original output, remains largely untapped. This is the quiet, often unfulfilling, truth of limited creativity, where scribes were overwhelmingly copyists, not authors, dedicating their immense intellectual prowess to faithful reproduction rather than genuine artistic or intellectual innovation, transforming their potential into a finely tuned instrument of historical preservation. It's like being a world-class musician who only ever performs cover songs perfectly, but never gets to compose their own melody. It really sucked to be a master wordsmith with no words of your own to craft. The vast majority of scribal work in ancient Mesopotamia was indeed dedicated to copying existing texts. This was a fundamental requirement for the preservation and dissemination of knowledge in a world without printing presses. Every copy of a legal code, a literary epic, a religious hymn, or a scientific observation had to be painstakingly reproduced by hand on new clay tablets. This act of reproduction was considered a highly valuable and honorable task, essential for cultural continuity. Scribes meticulously copied literary texts, epics like Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish, the creation myth, and various myths and legends were copied countless times across generations, ensuring their survival. Religious texts, hymns, prayers, rituals, omen texts, and divination manuals were reproduced to support temple practices and religious scholarship. Scholarly and scientific texts, astronomical observations, mathematical tables, medical treatises, and lexical lists, early dictionaries, and encyclopedias were meticulously copied and studied. Royal inscriptions and annals, official records of kings' reigns, their conquests, and their building projects were copied to spread their fame and legitimize their rule. In all these cases, the scribe's primary directive was fidelity to the original. Any deviation, intentional or accidental, a constant fear of errors as explored in Chapter 7, was generally frowned upon, if not actively punished. The goal was to produce an exact replica, ensuring that the wisdom of the past was transmitted accurately to future generations. This focus on reproduction necessarily meant a limited creativity for most scribes. A common historical truth is that the overwhelming majority of scribal work in ancient Mesopotamia was dedicated to copying existing texts, literary, religious, legal, and administrative, a crucial function for the preservation and transmission of knowledge in a pre-printing era. This emphasis on faithful reproduction meant most scribes acted as copyists rather than original authors. Historians still widely debate the precise moments or contexts in which individual scribes might have subtly introduced their own interpretations or minor innovations into the text they copied, blurring the lines between mere reproduction and nascent authorship. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed, detail about limited creativity and the role of scribes as predominantly copyists, not authors, is the curious phenomenon of scribal colophons, which, at the end of many tablets, would identify the scribe, sometimes his father's name, the date, and often a short prayer or dedication, providing a rare, brief glimpse of individuality within the sea of anonymous reproduction. Essentially a tiny personal stamp on a professionally prescribed task, offering a fleeting moment of self-expression in a career dominated by the words of others. Imagine Nabu, after completing a grueling copy of a complex astronomical text, meticulously pressing a small, almost hidden note at the very end of the final tablet. Hand of Nabu, son of Sinikisha, copied from an old text in the month of Simanu, year of the great king Hammurabi. May the god Nabu bless his hand. Yeah, this wasn't a boast of authorship, but a subtle claim of meticulous effort and identity. A tiny crack in the wall of his limited creativity, but a crack nonetheless. It's like being forced to sign a 1,000-page document where you didn't write any of it, but you get to add a tiny, personal doodle next to your signature. It really sucked to have so little room for personal expression. While there were certainly original compositions in Mesopotamia, epic poems, royal hymns, legal codes like Hammurabi's Code, these were generally the work of a select few highly gifted, often high-ranking scribes who might have served as court poets or royal chroniclers. Even these original compositions were typically commissioned by powerful patrons kings, temples, and served specific political, religious, or administrative purposes. They were not expressions of personal artistic freedom in the modern sense. The concept of authorship as we understand it today, an individual creating a work driven by personal vision and claiming intellectual ownership, was not as prominent in ancient Mesopotamia. Knowledge was often seen as divine revelation or collective wisdom, passed down through generations. The scribes' virtue lay in their ability to accurately transmit this knowledge, not in their capacity to invent new narratives or ideas. This limited creativity could be a source of frustration for a scribe with intellectual curiosity or artistic inclinations. Imagine spending your life perfecting a craft that primarily involves replication, never truly getting to put your own voice or vision into the work. The extensive training in language, literature, and mathematics, remember the myriad skills required from earlier chapters, would cultivate a sophisticated mind. But that mind was then largely confined to the role of a meticulous reproducer. It's like being a brilliant architect whose only job is to draw perfect copies of existing buildings, never designing a new one, even in scholarly work, like creating lexical lists of cuneiform signs, words, and their meanings, essentially early dictionaries. The process was one of compilation and categorization rather than truly original thought. Scribes would organize existing knowledge, ensuring its accessibility, but they rarely ventured into completely new theoretical frameworks. Their role was to maintain and organize the vast intellectual inheritance of Mesopotamia. So, while ancient Mesopotamian scribes were vital for the preservation of a rich cultural heritage, the stark reality of their limited creativity, where they functioned overwhelmingly as copyists, not authors, meant their lives were dominated by faithful reproduction rather than personal innovation. This era reminds us of the profound historical relationship between writing and its purpose, proving that for centuries, the power of the written word was often a tool for transmission, not creation, leaving us truly grateful for modern concepts of individual authorship, creative freedom, and the ability to express our own unique voices through writing, far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's life of perpetual replication. Let's gently return from the subtle frustration of limited creativity, where our Mesopotamian scribe functioned overwhelmingly as a copyist, not author. If we've just explored the intellectual constraints of their profession, tonight we'll delve into the very tangible, often painful, toll their work took on their bodies: health hazards, eye strain, and backaches. You might imagine a sedentary, comfortable job, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, the life of a scribe came with significant health hazards, leading to chronic conditions like severe eye strain and backaches, a silent price paid for their meticulous craft. Imagine yourself now. Nabu, an elderly scribe, perhaps in your late 50s or early 60s, still working in the vast archives of the temple complex in Uruk, around 1910 BCE. Your hands, once agile and strong, now tremble slightly as you carefully pick up a worn clay tablet. Your back, a constant source of dull, persistent pain, aches fiercely as you hunch over your work. Your eyes, once sharp enough to discern the smallest variations in cuneiform, wedges a skill you honed through years of battling cuneiform's complexity from Chapter 2, are now perpetually tired, watery, and often blurry, especially in the dim, flickering light of the archive room. You recall countless hours spent squatting or kneeling on the hard, uneven floor of the Adaba, the grueling training from Chapter 1. Then later, stooped over low tables or piles of tablets in your office. Your spine has adapted to this unnatural posture, but it's a painful adaptation. The intricate detail required for cuneiform, day after day, year after year, under the often poor lighting of ancient Mesopotamia, remember those harsh working conditions of heat and dust from Chapter 4, has taken a severe toll on your vision. You find yourself squinting more often, rubbing your tired eyes, and sometimes the small wedges seem to dance before you. You might even suffer from chronic headaches. a dull throb behind your eyes, a constant companion. Your neck is stiff, your shoulders permanently hunched. You are a repository of knowledge, a master of the written word. But your body bears the undeniable marks of your lifelong dedication. Silent screams of accumulated strain. This is the enduring physical truth of health hazards. Where a scribe's meticulous work led to chronic eye strain and backaches, a painful testament to the physical price paid for intellectual labor in the ancient world. It's like being a surgeon who has to perform every operation bent over a tiny microscope in a dark room while sitting on a bucket for 40 years. It really sucked to have your body literally breaking down from the pursuit of knowledge. The scribal profession, while intellectual, was far from physically easy. The demands of cuneiform writing, combined with the working conditions of ancient Mesopotamia, created several distinct health hazards for scribes. Firstly, and perhaps most prevalent, was eye strain. Cuneiform signs are intricate, composed of small but precise wedge marks. A scribe had to pay extremely close attention to detail, discerning subtle differences in angle, depth, and length of these wedges to ensure accuracy a vital necessity. As we discovered with the fear of errors in Chapter 7, this was exacerbated by poor lighting. Ancient Mesopotamian workplaces, whether adubas, temple offices, or palace scriptoria, relied on natural light, which could be inconsistent, or flickering oil lamps, which provided dim and uneven illumination. Imagine trying to do highly detailed work for hours on end in a poorly lit room, particularly after sunset or on cloudy days. Constant focus. The nature of the work demanded continuous, intense focus on small details. This prolonged near-vision work, without breaks for eye rest, would inevitably lead to fatigue, dryness, and eventually, long-term vision deterioration. Dust. As discussed in Chapter 4, the pervasive dust of Mesopotamia would irritate the eyes, leading to chronic discomfort, redness, and potentially infections, further compounding vision problems. A common historical truth is that the detailed and continuous nature of cuneiform inscription, performed under often poor lighting conditions, frequently led to chronic eye strain and vision problems for ancient Mesopotamian scribes. This was a recognized occupational hazard of their profession. Historians still widely debate the specific prevalence and severity of various vision impairments among scribes. Given the limited direct medical records from that era, a fascinating yet rarely discussed detail about these health hazards and the common afflictions of eye strain and backaches for Mesopotamian scribes is the curious reliance on scribes' benches, or low platforms, that were often specifically designed, though still rudimentary, to allow scribes to sit closer to their work, sometimes even at a slight incline to reduce the need for constant bending. Representing a very early, albeit limited, attempt at ergonomic design, a quiet acknowledgement by the society that their scribes were physically suffering from their craft, transforming simple furniture into a subtle form of occupational health support. Imagine Nabu as a young apprentice, squatting painfully on the floor, dreaming of the day he might earn the right to sit at a scribe's bench, a low, perhaps slightly elevated wooden platform that would allow him to bring his clay tablet closer to his eyes and reduce the agonizing bend in his back. It wasn't perfect, but it was an acknowledgement of their physical plight, a small comfort in a life of discomfort. It's like working in a cubicle farm for decades, but at least your cubicle has a slightly less uncomfortable chair than the interns. It really sucked that even their ergonomic solutions were so basic. Secondly, backaches and musculoskeletal problems were almost universal. The posture required for writing on clay tablets was inherently unnatural and strenuous. Scribes would typically squat, kneel, or sit cross-legged on the floor, leaning over a low table or simply placing the tablet on their lap. This posture put immense strain on the lower back, neck, and shoulders. Prolonged static posture hours spent in the same bent-over position, day after day, year after year, would lead to muscle fatigue, stiffness, and chronic pain. The human spine is not designed for such prolonged fixed flexion. Lack of proper seating. There were no chairs with backrests or adjustable desks. Scribes often worked on the floor, their bodies twisted into awkward positions to gain the necessary leverage and proximity to their work. Heavy materials. As we discussed in Chapter 3, clay tablets themselves were heavy, constantly lifting, moving, and manipulating these cumbersome objects would add to the strain on the back and arms. Imagine the cumulative effect of decades of this kind of physical stress. For a scribe, a persistent backache would not be an occasional nuisance but a constant companion, affecting every aspect of their life, from their ability to focus on their work to their sleep and leisure activities. Beyond these common ailments, scribes likely faced other, less direct, health hazards. Dust inhalation. The fine clay dust and general environmental dust from Chapter 4 would be inhaled constantly, potentially leading to respiratory issues over a lifetime. Hand and wrist strain. The repetitive motion of pressing the stylus into clay, particularly with the required precision, could lead to conditions similar to modern carpal tunnel syndrome or repetitive strain injury in the hands and wrists. Poor hygiene. The general squalor and filth of ancient cities, a pervasive historical reality that influenced about all aspects of life. Though not explicitly detailed for scribes in earlier chapters, meant that illnesses, infections, and general discomfort from unhygienic conditions were constant threats, which a sedentary indoor profession might not entirely escape. These physical tolls were rarely acknowledged or treated effectively. Ancient medicine, while surprisingly advanced in some areas, lacked the understanding of ergonomics, occupational health, or long-term chronic pain management. Scribes simply endured these conditions, their suffering a silent, often unseen, consequence of their invaluable contribution to Mesopotamian society. Their intellectual achievements came at a very real physical price. So, while the intellectual accomplishments of ancient Mesopotamian scribes are undeniable, the stark reality of the health hazards they faced, leading to chronic eye strain and backaches, was a pervasive and painful truth of their lives. This era reminds us of the profound link between arduous intellectual labor and the physical tolls it can exact, proving that for centuries, the pursuit of knowledge came at a heavy somatic cost, leaving us truly grateful for modern ergonomics, accessible healthcare, and workplaces designed with our physical well-being in mind. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's aching body and tired eyes, let's gently return from the physical toll of health hazards, where eye strain and backaches were the persistent companions of our Mesopotamian scribe. If we've just explored the bodily cost of their meticulous craft, tonight we'll conclude our journey by reflecting on the profound, often anonymous, culmination of their life's lingering legacy, anonymity, and oblivion. You might imagine a celebrated historical figure, but for your ancient Mesopotamian ancestor, a scribe's life's lingering legacy was often marked by anonymity and oblivion, a poignant testament to how individual contributions could be vast yet personally unacknowledged in the grand sweep of history. Imagine yourself now, Nabu, an old man. Your stylus hand might tremble, your eyesight is failing, and your back is a constant throb. You've probably retired from active service, perhaps enjoying a modest pension or living with your adult children. You look back at a life spent in the quiet pursuit of literacy. You endured the brutal apprenticeship, that distant nightmare from Chapter 1. You conquered the labyrinthine complexity of cuneiform, the 1,000 symbols that once danced before your eyes. As explored in Chapter 2, you wrestled daily with the unwieldy clay tablets, the heavy, fragile, messy medium from Chapter 3. You toiled under the relentless heat and dust, the harsh conditions from Chapter 4. And you spent countless hours performing monotonous labor, the repetitive tasks that tested your spirit from Chapter 5. You achieved a respected status, a rare privilege in your society, as we discussed in Chapter 6. Yet you were always aware of the fear of errors, the constant threat of punishment from Chapter 7, and the limited creativity that defined your role. You were a copyist, not an author. As we saw in Chapter 8, you feel the cumulative aches of eye strain and backache as your body's quiet protest from Chapter 9. You know, deep down, that you have contributed something immense. Your meticulously copied legal texts allow justice to prevail. Your precise administrative records ensure the granaries are full and the city functions. Your faithful reproductions of ancient epics connect your generation to the wisdom of ages past. You are a crucial link in the chain of knowledge, a silent guardian of civilization's memory. Yet, will anyone remember your name? Will your individual efforts be celebrated? Probably not. The vast majority of the millions of clay tablets unearthed from Mesopotamia bear no individual scribe's name. Or if they do, it's a brief colophon, a dry notation, not a dedication. Your legacy is inextricably woven into the fabric of your society's survival and its intellectual achievements. But your personal story, your struggles, your triumphs, your very existence will likely fade into anonymity and oblivion. You are a silent hero, your contributions profound, but your individual light will eventually be extinguished, absorbed into the grand narrative of Mesopotamian history, a poignant testament to the human tendency to focus on kings and conquests. While the quiet architects of knowledge often remain unseen, it's like being the anonymous programmer who wrote the foundational code for the internet, enabling billions of interactions, but no one knows your name. It really sucked to be so essential yet so personally forgotten. The legacy of the ancient Mesopotamian scribe is, without exaggeration, immense and enduring. They were the unsung heroes who literally invented and maintained the very concept of written history, law, and organized society. Their contributions shaped not just Mesopotamia, but laid foundations that influenced subsequent civilizations, including those of ancient Greece and Rome, and ultimately, our own. Their legacy includes the preservation of knowledge without scribes, the vast corpus of Mesopotamian literature, law, science, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and religious texts would have been lost to time. They were the human hard drives and cloud storage of their era, ensuring that generations of wisdom were passed down. The development of complex administration scribes enabled the creation of sophisticated bureaucratic systems necessary to manage large empires, complex economies, and intricate legal frameworks. Their meticulous record-keeping allowed for taxation, resource allocation, and the enforcement of laws on a grand scale, the foundation of law and justice. The world's first written law codes, like the Code of Ur-Nammu and the Code of Hammurabi, exist today because scribes painstakingly copied and preserved them. This allowed for standardized justice and a predictable legal environment. The birth of literature epics like Gilgamesh, widely considered one of the earliest surviving works of great literature, were products of scribal skill and dedication, offering profound insights into the human condition and providing archetypes that resonate even today. Scientific advancement, their astronomical observations, mathematical tables, and medical treatises were foundational for future scientific inquiry, representing some of the earliest systematic approaches to understanding the natural world. A common historical truth is that Mesopotamian scribes were foundational to the development and preservation of written culture, administration, and knowledge, contributing immensely to the enduring legacy of one of the world's first civilizations, often without receiving individual credit for their vast efforts. Their work laid critical groundwork for subsequent literary, legal, and scientific traditions. Historians still widely debate the extent to which the anonymity of most scribes reflects a deliberate cultural practice, rather than simply the ephemeral nature of their personal identities within large institutions. A fascinating, yet rarely discussed detail about life's lingering legacy and the pervasive reality of anonymity and oblivion for Mesopotamian scribes is the curious phenomenon of scribal nicknames, or colloquial monikers, sometimes found in informal administrative dockets or letters. Brief, often witty, labels attached to specific scribes by their colleagues, offering fleeting, almost accidental glimpses of their individual personalities or distinctive habits. A tiny crack in the otherwise impenetrable wall of professional anonymity, hinting at a vibrant personal life largely lost to history. Imagine Nabu, known perhaps in the back office as Nabu the Precise for his unwavering accuracy, or Nabu the Squinter due to his failing eyesight. These were not formal titles, but quiet acknowledgments of their individual quirks. A micro-legacy within the macro-oblivion. It's like finding a sticky note from a forgotten historical figure that says, Bob from accounts likes stale donuts. And it's the only personal detail you'll ever know about them. It really sucked to have your personal identity reduced to an inside joke among colleagues, lost to history. Despite this monumental legacy, the vast majority of individual scribes faded into anonymity and oblivion. Unlike kings, generals, or high priests, whose names were often immortalized in grand inscriptions and royal annals, most scribes operated in the background. Their primary job, a recurring theme throughout our journey, was to serve, to record, to preserve, not to create a personal brand or seek individual fame. Reasons for this anonymity include focus on content, not creator. The emphasis in Mesopotamian culture was often on the message or the document itself, not the person who inscribed it. The authority came from the king, the god, or the legal precedent, not from the scribe's individual genius. Colophons were functional, while some tablets included colophons as noted in Chapter 8. These were typically functional, identifying the scribe, his father, the date, and sometimes the source text or the number in a series. They were rarely celebratory odes to the scribe's skill or creativity. Sheer numbers. Over hundreds of thousands of clay tablets have been recovered. Given the sheer volume of material produced by countless scribes over millennia, it is statistically improbable for most individual names to stand out, even if they were recorded. Institutional service. Most scribes were employed by large institutions, temples, palaces, or wealthy households. Their identity was often subsumed within the identity of their employer. They were part of a team, contributing to a larger organizational output. Lack of personal narrative. Unlike some later periods in history, Mesopotamian scribes rarely left behind autobiographical accounts, personal diaries, or reflections on their inner lives. Their voices were typically channeled through the official or scholarly texts they copied, leaving little room for their personal stories to emerge. This meant that a scribe's life, filled with intense intellectual effort and physical discomfort, the health hazards from Chapter 9, could culminate in a profound sense of personal oblivion. They built the literary and administrative backbone of a civilization, but their individual hand, their unique journey, would rarely be remembered. Their longing for perhaps more creative freedom or personal recognition, a quiet ache from Chapter 8, remained largely unfulfilled in terms of lasting fame. The power of the scribal class was immense, but it was a collective power, derived from their shared skill and indispensability. It was a power of function, not necessarily of individual recognition. They were powerful as a group, as the guardians of knowledge. But individual scribes often remained largely unseen within the grand tapestry of history. So, as we conclude our deep dive into what sucked about being a scribe in ancient Mesopotamia, and reflect on the profound, often anonymous culmination of their lives in life's lingering legacy, anonymity and oblivion, we are reminded of the immense, yet often unseen, human effort behind the enduring achievements of early civilizations. This era serves as a stark reminder that even those who held the keys to knowledge and power often lived and died without individual recognition, proving that, for centuries, the foundations of civilization were built by countless anonymous hands, leaving us truly grateful for our modern ability to celebrate individual contributions, to build personal legacies, and to preserve our own stories. Far from the binding, unromanticized reality of a Mesopotamian scribe's quiet, powerful, yet ultimately forgotten existence,